But so who is this third-party observer that's observing your thoughts, that's animating your body? Okay, the body's like an avatar that you're inhabiting, so to speak, temporarily, or your consciousness is. And so we are all part of a greater consciousness. We are subsets of that greater consciousness, if you will. Spiritual enlightenment would be to have a deeper understanding, in my opinion, of who and what you are. I believe that we are eternal, indestructible, powerful beings. And we're here experiencing what we are not, so that we can fully appreciate and understand who and what we are. Hello, my friends. I want to talk a little bit about spirituality and knowing your true self. And is that even possible? And what does that mean? You've probably heard that before. You need to know your true self, or you need to find your true self. So what does that mean? Well, I've been on a lifelong quest to know my true self and know what that means. And I want to talk a little bit beyond the cliches and the quotes and all that kind of stuff. Although those are helpful and they're good tools to remind us and to keep us going in the right direction, really knowing your true self, in my opinion, goes far beyond all of that kind of stuff. In fact, when I read stuff online nowadays, I sometimes get, I wouldn't say perturbed, I get a little annoyed at reading the same stuff over and over and over again. But that's just me, that's my problem. That's not condemning anybody for doing that or saying those things, because I do that a lot too sometimes, and I used to do it a lot more to get people to think. And just because I'm moving a little bit beyond that doesn't mean I should care what other people do. And so that's something that's within me that I need to deal with. Which brings me to my first point on that is that the outer always reflects the inner. Whatever's going on in your outer world, that's reflecting what's going on inside you. Neville Goddard likes to say, don't get mad at anybody for annoying you. They're just showing you who you are on the inside. You know, and you've probably heard it said as the mirror effect, because the 3D reality is a mirror of your inner reality, of your inner beliefs and thoughts. You've heard me probably say that before if you've listened to this channel much. I think that is really a key understanding to know and find out who your true self is, who you truly are. So are you your thoughts and beliefs? Are you the body? You've probably heard stuff to this effect before too. You're not the body. You're not your thoughts. You're the observer. You're the one who's observing those thoughts. And sometimes that can be helpful in diffusing situations where you might be annoyed with somebody or they're annoyed with you. You can sort of detach and become the third-party observer, which is the real you. That's who you truly are. Okay? And there's more to it than that too, and I'll get into that in a little bit. That can be a very helpful thing to do. Another point I want to make is people are always looking for spiritual enlightenment, at least people who in the spiritual community, I should say, even in the religious community, in some cases, looking for some sort of breakthrough or move forward. I know I do all the time. And I think one of the things that hinders that is that you try too hard. You're trying too hard. You're so focused on it. And what you're doing is by focusing on it, often what we do is we focus on the negative, that we don't have it, that we haven't found it yet, or we haven't fully awakened yet, that kind of thing. And the more you focus on that, the more you draw attention, you draw your attention, which draws your energy to that, and you get more of what you don't want. You know, you've heard the saying before, energy follows thought, or where attention goes, energy flows. And so if you have your attention on something, especially if it's something that you don't want, you're actually feeding it and helping to perpetuate it. I know that doesn't make sense, especially in the 3D world. It goes against all of our cultural programming and beliefs and so on and so forth. But I'm assuming some of you have already know this, or you're at least considering it and contemplating it. And that's the one thing I'll suggest also is to contemplate it. So what does it truly mean to know yourself? I'm not sure I can answer that 100%, but I'll give you my opinion. And I like to think it's 95 to 98 to 99%. So, it's something for you to contemplate. I am by no means saying that you should believe anything that I say. You should contemplate it, and if it rings the bell of truth in you, then adopt it. If it doesn't, then set it on the shelf and wait for more information or more understanding, because everybody's different. That's the interesting thing. But the other thing too is to give it up. So I put that in one of the memes for the thumbnail, and some might think that that means giving up on spirituality, period. That's not what it means at all. It means it kind of goes along with trying too hard. It's like, just give it up, you know? Yeah, keep a focus on improving your spirituality and understanding and knowing who you are, but let it go. Don't obsess over it. And that also speaks to putting your attention on it and keeping your attention on the fact that you don't have what you want, or you haven't found what you're looking for, so to speak. So, that's a positive affirmation versus a negative affirmation. In the positive, you can just focus on that you have it already, or that you will have it. And of course, Neville Goddard teaches that you should focus on that it's already there. It's already happened. Everything in creation has already been created. All you have to do is sort of pick it off the shelf of the quantum field or the Akashic records, if you will, depending on how you term it. That's a interesting subject in and of itself, is the terms that we use. And so Joe Dispenza calls it the quantum field. The ancient wisdom and a lot of the spiritual community will call it the Akashic records. And maybe even Akashic records isn't quite right, because the quantum field is that everything has already happened, and all you have to do is put your attention on what it is that you desire, and it will appear in your 3D reality. And I guess you could still call it the Akashic records, because it's not necessarily a record of stuff well, I guess it is a record if it's already happened, right? Creation is finished, say the scriptures. So that kind of goes along with that too. Okay, back to what does it mean to truly find yourself? Well, I think it's maybe a never-ending journey. But so who is this third-party observer that's observing your thoughts, that's animating your body? Okay, the body's like an avatar that you're inhabiting, so to speak, temporarily, or your consciousness is. And so we are all part of a greater consciousness. We are subsets of that greater consciousness, if you will. Or I like to say, unique expressions of the one, or God. And some of the ancient wisdom also teaches that we are thoughts in the mind of God. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. So a thought is a subset of the greater consciousness, and that kind of works the same in your own mind. Also, all your thoughts are subsets of your overall consciousness. Wouldn't you say? Wouldn't you agree with that? So what does all that mean? I guess to some it could just sound like gobbledygook. And it's me analyzing it too. And so it takes an inner journey, and sometimes the inner journey is hard to put into words, if not impossible in some cases, through meditations or even plant medicine ceremonies and things that people do to kind of break on through to the other side. There's a Jim Morrison quote that I wasn't necessarily planning on using from that old tune from the Doors, right? So if you don't know who that is or what that is, look it up. I'm kind of dating me by saying that. So yeah, and the other side, we speak of the other side as if it's a different world or a different place, and it's really not. It's all right here. And the veil between the two worlds is a mindset, or you could say a frequency. So we're kind of tuned in to the frequency of the 3D reality, and we need to tune in to the other frequency. So there's people that do all kinds of things like out-of-body experiences and astral travel and that sort of thing. And they're just tuning in they're not actually traveling anywhere. They're just tuning into some of the frequencies that are already here and surround us. If you've ever seen things or had manifestations that seemed supernatural, you were probably temporarily tuning into that frequency. And you may have not known it. I think it's the same when we dream and so on. They say when you dream, you're going out of body every night, whether you remember it or not. And so it's an interesting concept. And if you're interested in learning how to go out of body, there's forums like on Facebook, and there's all kinds of videos on YouTube. There's plenty of books out there. Of course, the Monroe Institute and Robert Monroe made out-of-body experiences popular. If you haven't heard of him or don't know who he is, look it up. And you can look up his books. Another set of books I would recommend is William Bowman. He was an instructor at the Monroe Institute, teaching people how to go out of body and so on. So it is something that you can learn. And I bought one of their courses, and I learned how to do it. And I was only able to do it once, but I couldn't stay focused on it long enough to be able to do it again. Maybe one of these days I will. And so, anyways, all of these things are enhancements, and they're part of the journey, and it's part of the fun of the journey too. So I like to say, to quote a quote, that there is no destination. It's a never-ending journey. So enjoy the ride. Anyways, because when you get to the destination, you could get bored, and so what do? You try to figure out, okay, now what are we going to do when we're here? Like if you go on vacation or something, right? You don't just get to the place you want to go. If you want to go to Hawaii, you don't just go there and then do nothing. You want to continue to do stuff, So there's all these little sub journeys, and that's part of the fun. And life is kind of like that too. And the journey to enlightenment, to spiritual enlightenment, I guess you could call it. What does that even mean too, right? So spiritual enlightenment would be to have a deeper understanding, in my opinion, of who and what you are. I believe that we are eternal, indestructible, powerful beings. And we're here experiencing what we are not, so that we can fully appreciate and understand who and what we are. You've heard me probably say that before, and I won't give my analogy. You'll have to look at some of my previous videos. I have an analogy, and I think I've kind of beat it to death. So I'll just leave it at that. And that's the only thing that seems to make sense to me. And that doesn't mean I haven't fully figured out or anything. And I don't think I do. I learned long ago that there's always more. And I encourage you to always continue to seek and to move forward, but to have fun and enjoy the ride too while you're on it. That's the thing. We're here. Part of the reason we're here is to have fun and to enjoy. Sometimes I tell people, when they say, well, why are we here? I said, well, because we were bored, being omnipotent and omnipresent. And, you could think about it, at least from this perspective, it seems like, man, that could be really boring. So, hey, let's jump in the holodeck and have a bizarre experience or a real trip that seems real, That's one way to look at it anyways, right? So tell me in the comments what you think, my friends. Why do you think we're here? And what do you think true spiritual enlightenment is? And how do you know, what do you think knowing your true self means? Now, I guess that's sort of a hard question to answer if you don't know who your true self is. Okay, I think I know who my true self is to a certain degree, not 100%. Again, like I said, I don't claim to understand everything, and I know that there's always more. So, and that's what makes the journey exciting and fun. So even the so-called bad stuff, right? It's all part of the experience. So, and it makes us appreciate the good stuff even more so. It's like the contrast between dark and light. You couldn't look at that beautiful view out the window without having the contrast of dark and light. You wouldn't see anything. It would just all be a blinding white light and no contrast whatsoever. So dark and light are part of the same spectrum. They're not separate, okay, like religion teaches. So, in fact, even the scriptures teach that God created evil. And that's in Isaiah 40, I believe. Maybe I'll look it up and put it in the video when I edit it, but we'll see. If not, just go look it up yourself. Nowadays, with the internet and Google and Grok and AI and everything, you can just type something in and it'll find it for you. So I think that that's pretty interesting. So, but what's the point of all of this? What's the point of me talking about all of this? Okay, the point is to enjoy life. Okay, enjoy the journey, enjoy the ride. That's the point of life, in my opinion. To experience who and what we are not, to appreciate who and what we are, and having fun along the way. Now that might be hard to grasp for somebody who's had a traumatic life. I understand, or had a lot of trauma in their life. I understand that, and this doesn't necessarily make the pain go away. But here's something to consider for the people who have had trauma, and perhaps you're one of them. Is that a lot of those people go on to help others who've been through trauma and do a lot of good things, and some of them become very prominent and famous people for doing that. And had they not gone through that trauma, they wouldn't have become who they are. And so you've probably heard it said before that we choose this life and the lessons that we're going to learn, and I happen to agree with that, and even the trauma. And that's really hard for some people to accept, and I get it. I understand. If you can't accept that, that's fine. I'm not, trying to gloss over what you've been through. I think we've all had some trauma to some degree, but obviously some people have had it more than others and worse than others. I think we've all had it in previous lives if we haven't had it in this life. And, like one of the examples that I have given before is that somebody who has a propensity for addiction. I don't have that propensity, but I have friends that have, and I partied when I was younger and did a lot of things, but I had friends who couldn't put it down and couldn't put it away. And I always wondered about that. And you can see it, you can look around you and see it in different people. They can go out and party and drink and have fun, and they don't get addicted to it and have to have it and ruin their lives over it. And then there's others who can't, and they call it a disease, but I just think that it means that those of us who can put it down and put it away have already overcome that addiction in previous lives. Maybe it took 2 or 3 lives to do that. And those who haven't are here to learn to do that. And so they may have this life and maybe another life or 2. They probably don't want to hear that, but you might be able to do it in one life and overcome it and know. And so even though you don't have a memory of that life and what happened, the essence of that lesson stays with you. And so you don't have that propensity to be addicted. And again, that's my opinion on that sort of thing. And maybe that can be helpful with somebody. And that's also an incentive to, if you're having some problems with addiction, to overcome it in this life so that you won't have it in another life. Some people that have had a traumatic life or are having a traumatic life say, well, I'm not coming back. Okay. Well, I believe that that's your choice. You don't have to come back. Some people don't. Some people think that we're forced here, and I don't believe that. But anyways, well, that was kind of a rabbit hole tangent to get off on, I guess, but it's all related. The other thing is that we're all connected. I've heard it said that we're not all connected and da-da-da. Well, if we're all parts of the one, then we're all connected in some way. If we're all thoughts in the mind of God or unique expressions of God or source, then we definitely are all connected in ways. And I remember and I've said this, maybe in the last few videos, I've said this several times, listening to an NDE experience of a gal who saw her thoughts when she was on the other side. She saw her thoughts attaching to people, especially her negative thoughts about them, attach to them and influence them and cause them to have negative thoughts back towards her or to other people. And it became this vicious cycle, so to speak, where the next person would do it and pass it on to the next person and so on. And she thought, oh my God, I need to control how I think about other people, even if I'm angry at them or mad at them. And I'm paraphrasing what she said and the way I remember what she said. Anyways, I probably should go listen to that again. And I already understood that to a certain degree, but it really brought it home for me. The way you think about others influences them. If you think somebody's just going to be a jerk and an ass to you all the time, they're probably going to be a jerk and an ass to you all the time. And people say, well, so what? They're a jerk and an ass, and that's just who they are. But you can actually influence them and change that. And I have done that. And I have a video, and it's about healing relationships and family rifts and so on and so forth. And I've mentioned that before, and I will link it in the description of this video. I've been linking it in the last several videos, and it's worth a watch. And it's doing exactly what I'm talking about. It's thinking the highest of somebody, even though you may be mad at them or have a rift with them. And you don't even have to go talk to them and work it out or anything. And I have healed some family rifts that way, and some rifts with other people that way too, and it works. So there is a connection with all of humanity, and it ripples throughout humanity. You've probably heard the saying, if you're not living your dreams, you're living your fears. And so humanity is caught in this vicious cycle of fear, which accounts for our legacy of war and bloodshed and, all the things that have gone on in our history. And I do believe that humanity is trying to rise above a lot of these things, at least a certain portion of humanity, and it's causing a divide for the people who don't want to raise in consciousness in that. And so if you've listened to or read any of Dolores Cannon's stuff, she talks about the two earths, that the earth will split. And some people think that's a physical split, and some people think that that's a spiritual or a vibrational frequency split. I lean towards the frequency split, and I can see that divide. And somebody described it once as possibly that people will go out of your lives, if you take on a higher frequency or a higher vibration, so to speak. People who don't want to come up to that level will eventually fade out of your life. But somebody went further, maybe it was one of these channelers, and said that you actually won't be able to see them, just like we can't see the other side normally because it's a different frequency or vibration. The divide in the vibration and frequency will become so great that those people will seemingly disappear. And they'll still be living in their world, their lower vibrational world, dealing with all the crime and wars and all this kind of stuff. And the people who rise up out of that will be living in a new earth or a new world or a new earth in a higher frequency where love and peace and kindness and that sort of thing are much more paramount than they were in the old world. That's kind of how I see it. So sometimes it seems very far off, but you never know. I think that we're in a time where a lot of the lies and half-truths and things that have kept us in a lower frequency are being exposed, and there's a spiritual awakening going on of sorts. And this is all part of finding out who and what we truly are, in my opinion. So keep moving forward, my friends, and keep thinking the highest. Keep looking to a brighter future. That doesn't mean there won't be bumps in the road. That doesn't mean that we don't acknowledge the negative. You've heard my analogy probably of the positive and the negative, and that they're part of the same circuit, like with a battery. You have to have both, the dark and the light. You have to have that contrast, and so on. It's part of what makes this world exciting, even though it can be traumatic at times. So those are things to remember, and I hope that maybe that can help you, and I hope some of that resonates with you. And, if it doesn't, it doesn't. When you're ready, it will. And just try to keep an open mind and try to keep moving forward. And try to remember who you are. Put that as an intent when you fall asleep. Just when you're about ready to fall asleep, ask yourself at least 3 times, who am I? Or do that in meditation. I did that once in meditation, and after a couple of months of asking that, I had a very profound experience and experienced the oneness of all things. And I do have an older video on there that's not done very well where I talk about that, and I'm not sure what it's titled. Maybe I'll link that in the description this time in this video also, and see how it goes. So All right, my friends, I'll leave you with that. I hope you got something out of this. Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with, and let's discuss it. Let's hear about it. All right, take care, my friends.